Does the press report everything it knows, regardless of the consequences? What about information that jeopardizes the national security? As early as 1940, the press knew about President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's drastic physical deterioration, but kept the news to itself.
From the case of Franklin Roosevelt, a dying man in 1944, to give the journalists their due, in 44, the president's doctors were lying heroically, and the expectation of a disclosure simply hadn't developed. But from dying Roosevelt to Gary Hart outside his townhouse, there's obviously an enormous change. In that sense, journalism has acquired more ability to influence events.
Vote Stevenson, vote Stevenson, a man you can believe in, son.
In the early 1950s, television's growing popularity gave politicians more access to the American public. Both press coverage and political commercials paid for by candidates became increasingly important. And the media consultant became essential in helping the candidate present the right image.
Will lead us till the peace is won.
There's a famous story from the 1968 presidential campaign, and it involves a guy named Roger Ailes, who's now George Bush's media advisor. He was at that time working for the Mike Douglas show in Philadelphia. And Richard Nixon came through, and in the waiting room, he said something like, "It's too bad we have to use these kinds of TV gimmicks to be elected president nowadays." And Ailes, who at that time was only 26 years old, turned around and said, "Mr. Nixon, television is not a gimmick. And if you think it's a gimmick, you're never going to be elected president." And Nixon turned around and hired Ailes, and he later became an important media consultant, which in the television age is our form of political bosses. They're not the same as the old-style mayor dailies, but they do exercise the same kind of broad-based influence within the American political system that some of the bosses used to, in terms of agenda setting and the counter-punching that's involved in a political campaign.
The old backroom bosses were trying to control the process themselves. And I think what the political consultants today are trying to influence and control the political debate, but recognize it's taking place as a public debate.
He did not think it was arms for hostages. And it was only later that, and that's me.
I don't want to be argumentative, Mr. Vice President.
You do, Dan.
No,
this is not a great
sir,
night, because I want to talk about why I want to be president, why those 41% of the people are supporting me.
And Mr. Vice President, these questions are
judge a whole career. It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York? Well, now, would you like that?
Mr.
I have
Vice President,
respect for you, but I don't have respect for what you're doing here tonight.
George Bush suffers from what is known as the wimp factor. And so if you watched the spin that was put on that whole thing with Rather and Bush, the next day in the newspapers it was Bush was decisive and he won the battle with Dan Rather. And actually, you know, that's how it came out. And the tough guy against the press, that was good for Bush's image. But it was extremely well planned by Roger Ailes, who had done the exact same thing for President Reagan when he faced Mondale in the second debate.
But is this news or manipulation of the media?
When the Palestinian uprising began on the West Bank, the Palestinians thought they were being very clever because they had figured out how, with stone throwing, to get the cameras present and not get them blamed, because it was David against Goliath. What they did not understand about television is that saturation journalism wears out an issue. There are only so many times film can come in to the editor of an evening news program saying we have yet more film of yet more rocks being thrown at yet more Israeli soldiers. And the man says, sorry, we've seen that. We've done that. So journalism definitely wears out an issue. Unquestionably, there is more information churned out. That does not mean that there's been a commensurate increase in the time Americans are willing to devote to absorbing that information.
You can't fault the media on whether or not people are discussing issues. I think when the American public is ready to tune in, they'll find more than a sufficient amount of information on the tube for them to make an intelligent, and in their newspapers for them to make an intelligent judgment when they go to the polls.
I think some of the scandals have run on longer than need be, because I suppose the people who decide what to put on the news shows and what to feature, what to put into the headlines, felt that they would titillate people and attract the audience. That's an editorial judgment that the media is just going to have to make from day to day and issue to issue and event to event.
I was playing to the people. We did, I can't say that totally honestly either, because we did people events. And, you know, if I sat down with a group of people in Ohio at an environmental waste site, I mean, I was really concerned about the fact that these people were living with a toxic dump that had been hidden. I had worked on legislation in Congress. We really had an exchange of ideas. But at the same time, was it a very nice photo opportunity for the press? Of course it was. So that you kind of deal with both. You don't play solely to the media, but you can't quite forget they're around when you see yourself on national television, you know, that evening.
The media's role in a political campaign is part referee. So if somebody is making a truly irresponsible charge or saying something patently false, the media will say, look, these are the boundaries of discourse. Part agenda setter, and mostly the water in which everyone swims, the air that everybody breathes.
The relationship between the media and politics has grown in complexity and intensity. From soapbox to satellite, the news media have become a state-of-the-art, multi-billion-dollar industry. But unlike most businesses, the media have a responsibility to the American public and are protected by the U.S. Constitution. At times, the media and politics clash. Often the press reports what the public doesn't want to hear and what the government doesn't want to reveal. But ultimately, the interaction between the two forces empowers the American people by providing them with the information they need to govern their free society.
Americans are out there making wheat and steel and cars and babies and educations and doing all that stuff, and journalists say, we run the world? You kidding me?